Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Chris Black, an Emmy Award nominee and the co-creator and writer of the Apple TV Plus series Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. Chris, I wanted to say, I think something that would be a challenge with the Monsterverse, right, is creating so many compelling human characters, right, amid the Titans. This show, you have, I was like at least 8 or 9 characters where I was like, wow, I would watch a whole show just about this one character, and you have all of them in the same show. So I guess just to start, when you were conceiving this and coming up with it, was did you start with Kintaro, or did you start with Lee? How did you kind of conceptualize where you would go with the characters, I guess?
Well, Chris, it's great to see you this morning, and thank you for that. And that I think that bodes well for spin-offs, that we could take any of these characters and just hand them their own show, but that's maybe a conversation for another day. But I mean, look, I think you always have to start from character. What's your entry point into the story? Who's your point of view character? I mean, as much as we spoke early on, people would say, "Oh, well, what are you working on now?" And I would always say, "Oh, the Godzilla show. I'm working on the Godzilla show," which obviously to some extent it is. It's set in the Godzilla universe, and Godzilla is the franchise character, and we do think, and Toho thinks of Godzilla as a character. But we couldn't tell, or at least I didn't feel that I could tell, a 1 hour live action serialized drama from Godzilla's point of view. So it started really with the Kate character. And it's funny looking back now, it feels like we have been working on this for so long, that when Matt Fraction and I first started talking about it, we knew that G-Day was kind of the starting point in the idea of, telling a survivor story, and we may have talked about this before, the idea of it feeling almost like a post 9/11 show, like after this kind of life-changing and world-changing tragedy and event, it's like, how does it affect the people who lived through it? And that was where we started from, someone who had been in San Francisco when Godzilla attacked. And then we knew we also wanted to make it a family story. And it was Matt's pitch actually to make it about the Randa family. He wanted to tell essentially an origin story for Monarch, that to take John Goodman's story that he tells to Samuel L. Jackson in Kong Skull Island about having been on the ship the Lawton when it was sunk by a monster, and then that launched his obsession with finding out what these things were. Matt wanted to tell an origin story that went back to that, and then the Randa, using Bill Randa as the kind of genesis. It then built out from there, and it became a family, a story about legacy and family and dynasty. We wanted them to sort of be our Skywalkers, the Randas. And then at some point we came up with this twist of, well, what if in looking for the secret of her father and his disappearance, that Kate discovers she has this whole other family, and a half brother that she never knew about, and then from there it just took off, and everything just sort of, that was really the inflection point, and at which point we knew we had a story. We knew we had something that we could use to build a season of television on.
Yeah, you have to say, that twist of them of the Kate and Kintaro being half siblings, and the secret. I was just I've never actually, it's such a great twist, because I'm like, wow, I would have never thought of that, and it's something that you don't usually see, right? I just was like, oh, it automatically makes it incredibly compelling, and knotted in a way that kind of makes it feel different than I guess you could have done a more straightforward thing, right? It
Yeah,
just automatically
it felt like it covered so many themes, about secrets, about betrayal, about family dynasty, about legacy, about, it was the secrets not only of her family, but the secrets of Monarch as an organization, and all. It felt like it just wound up being such a great, sort of engine to drive these characters forward. And the funny thing was after we pitched it and came up with it, and everybody involved was really excited about it, we started hearing stories from people that it was not that uncommon. People would go, "Oh, yeah, that was my, my cousin that happened to, or a friend that happened to, or I discovered, that my parent had this whole other life." It was like to our surprise, was way more common a story than you would imagine.
Wow. That's crazy. We talked about, I mean, obviously we mentioned you have a great cast here, so many incredible actors, and then obviously Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell playing Lee. Does casting inform, once you kind of come up with the thing, does casting inform what you're doing with the characters and the arcs, and or are you evolving things because you're seeing how the actors are kind of working together? How did that work for you?
Yeah, well, I think that works on every show I've ever worked on. It's like, I mean, you start with what's on the page because you haven't cast it yet. You create the set of characters out of your imagination or out of the process. And then once actors come in and sort of start to give them life, you you start writing to that to that actor's strengths. I mean, I think the May character is a great example that when in the early drafts of the script, that character was British. She was a British, she had been born and raised in London. She was a British expat. She had moved to Tokyo. And we had built this whole backstory, about she had come from this working class British family and all this kind of stuff. And then we cast Kiersey, who's incredible. And she owned that character. And then who May was became who Kiersey made that character. And what the original kind of pitch for that character's story on the page just went away because it wasn't Kiersey's version of May.
Right. That's awesome. Do you have like you mentioned like earlier, like kind of tying it into the Kong Skull Island, and obviously there are such connections here to Godzilla as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you're building a show in like, I guess how much connections do you, or how much integration, I guess, do you have to have with the monsters, or like, are those discussions going on, or like, how does that, I guess, work just in generally in concept, I guess?
Those discussions are always ongoing, and we, the feature franchise and what is now hopefully the expanding TV franchise are separate. I mean, they are tracking their own stories in their own separate lanes. And Legendary and the Legendary feature team have been incredibly kind of collaborative and generous in telling us like this is our story to tell. But at the same time, they live in the same canonical universe. So we can't do stuff that directly violates the timeline of the movies or have, so there's a little bit of dancing between the raindrops and making sure that we line up. But there's also a huge amount of leeway. I mean, there are, if you look at the movies all in their own timeline, all fall 4 or 5 years apart. And so, and Kong Skull Island is, I think, 1973. So there's an almost 50-year gap between the events of that movie and then Godzilla 2014. So, or 40 years. But so there's a ton of room for us to play and sort of build our own story. But we're always having these conversations, like a good example would be in the first season, we had broken initially a big Hollow Earth storyline. And then Legendary, the feature side, was like, well, that is a huge piece of their upcoming movie. Now the movie that's already come out, the Godzilla,
New Empire.
Kong,
Yeah.
X Kong.
Yes.
And so they were like, we're setting so much of this feature film in the Hollow Earth. We don't want these projects stepping on each other. So we came up with a pivot. We created, what ultimately became Axis Mundi, which was our own sort of version of this netherworld, this region of the Titans and stuff like that. And that was something that evolved over the course of the season through discussions and making sure that our projects coordinated with theirs.
That's awesome because like that's such a great part of the show, obviously, and like the time displacement and stuff. And so like it sounds like necessity maybe is a mother invention sometimes in this, right? Where you're like kind of creating something that ends up being even maybe better than or whatever than your original idea, maybe.
Yeah, well, it's about being nimble and being creative and just making sure that you don't fall too much in love with any one thing because you never know. I mean, obviously you have to know what you want to fight for, but at the same time, it is about being collaborative and being open-minded and like exactly like you say, sometimes it takes you a place that you didn't anticipate, but you wound up in a better place than you would have if you had just stuck with your original idea.
Were you always going to do, even if it was Hollow Earth, I guess, was it always going to be that time displacement thing as well? Or is that like kind of, did you evolve from that? Like where it's like Kurt is, or Lee is older than like he's been gone, like you're losing time when you're in there.
Well, it was funny because it was something that we came with fairly early on. And again, you'll have to forgive me when Matt and I first, it's so long, it's like 3 years ago. So I'm trying to remember what the exact process was. We did know, given if we wanted to tell this origin story and make the time fit, that Bill Randa was a World War II veteran. He talks about in the mythology of the feature films, Monarch was founded by President Truman in 1945. If you want that character old enough and you want the Lee Shaw character to fit into that timeline, the character in the present day would be like almost 100 years old. And we were like, well, so how do we deal with that? And then, when we cast Kurt, it's like, obviously he's not that old. So how do we do that? And it all sort of, one thing led to another. And, we always liked the idea from very early on. I think we had pitched the idea that Keiko wasn't really dead, when she falls into the rift, is pulled down into the pit at the plutonium plant at the end of the first episode. And, the sort of time dilation idea, it grew naturally out of that.
Just so great. I love anything that does that time dilation stuff. I'm always in on. It's such a great sci-fi, compelling sci-fi premise. It really is.
Right. Well, and it was a fairly clean, and we talked about this a lot internally, that Access Monday isn't a time machine. It's like you can't pop in and then pop out anywhere you want. But the fact that time runs slower there than it does everywhere else was, for us anyway, as a storytelling device, was really easy to get our heads around.
Right. Yeah, it's so good. Do you have, I mean, like, I guess the show is obviously was like really well received, and I think it's been a great coming back for a second season, like we were talking about, and like maybe spinoffs as well. Like, I mean, I guess was that hardening too? Because I feel like a show like we said, like a Godzilla show about the human characters, maybe some fans or would be like, oh, I like Godzilla, like I don't care, like am I gonna really like this? But it's so great that people really seemingly really responded to this. And I guess, were you like, yes, thank God, or like how'd you feel about that?
Well, of course, obviously we were thrilled. You spend all of this time and effort, and you pour your sort of your passion and your talent and people's time and creativity into something. You want it to be appreciated. You want people to watch it and like it. And we wanted to give Apple a hit show, so we were obviously very gratified that people responded to the show, and that it did well, and that Apple and Legendary were excited and want to continue to tell the story and tell new stories. There's no bad version of that,
No.
But to your point, yeah, I mean, there are certain people who were disappointed, who were like, I want more monsters, I want more Godzilla. It isn't as big as the features. It's not the spectacle we've come. You can't please everyone.
Right.
And so we really tried to tell a story that we were excited about, that we hoped would give fans of the MonsterVerse enough of the world that they were craving, that they would be happy with, but at the same time gave them something different than the movies, because we knew we couldn't compete with the movies and didn't want to, So, but yeah, I mean, I think overwhelmingly the response was very positive, but there are always going to people like any. I mean, I've worked on Star Trek and other things that have very passionate fan bases, and people, they have a certain ownership of the show. They feel they know these characters, they own these characters, and are disappointed when you don't do things that they want to see. So, but it's part of the process. It's something that we just try to sort of give people something that we believe in and we have passion for and we're excited about, and we hope they will be too.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think it comes across the passion. It's exciting. It's a really very good show. So that's why I'm like, those people maybe should.
Thank you.
It's really good. I guess like what. So obviously, like season 2 is in development now, right? I'm imagine like and like so. I guess first, like, what did you working on season 1? Like, what did you learn? Like, what did you learn? Like, you're like, oh, we could tweak or do differently in season 2, or like, were there like evolutions of stuff that maybe were like, like, oh, this is something that will like really lock in season 2.
I don't know. It's funny. In a lot of the times when you're working on a show, it is so, you get so focused on the job. It is such a demanding and complex job to actually produce a season of television, and you become so sort of hyper focused on what's in front of you. You hope the show will be successful, and you hope that you will have a chance to continue telling that story and do more of them. But I can only speak for myself. I wasn't thinking ahead to season 2. I was like, we just got to get season 1 done. And it's like, how do we get these scripts written? How do we get them produced? How do we tell the story to the best of our ability? And we'll figure out season 2 when we get to it. And then, of course, then you get to it, and it's like, oh crap, what are we going to do now? But I think, where we left the season gave us so much, fertile territory for storytelling, that Keiko comes back, we appear to have lost Colonel Shaw. We have this reunion with the family. It feels like a great launch pad for season 2. And I think going back to our previous conversation or just what we said a minute ago, was we want to continue to tell this human story. We want to continue to tell the story of the Randa family and Kate and Kentaro and their father Hiroshi and now their grandmother Keiko. But there also is a hunger for more spectacle, for more monsters. How do we make it bigger and better? We reveal Kong at the end of the first season, so there's going to be an expectation you're going to see more of Kong that we want to deliver on. So it's like it becomes the challenge of it's the blessing and the curse of making a hit show is on the one hand you're like, woohoo, we made a hit show, and then you're also, oh crap, we made a hit show.
Do you have mapped out, like, he's like, do you have like, not even to put, I guess maybe to put you on the spot, do you have like an endpoint planned out, or like you just gonna go season to season? Like, how have you thought about it now that
I
you're
have some ideas. It's funny. It depends. I try not to. I've been in this business long enough. I try not to think too far ahead because you never know what's going to happen. But I have some ideas in my head of how I would like to see this end, where I would like to see Kate and Kentaro at the end of a couple, 3, 4, 5 seasons, whatever it ends up being. But right now we're focusing on season 2. We have a roadmap for it. We're working on stories now. We're getting ready to go into production later this year, and everybody's incredibly excited, to be able to bring these characters back. And we've been talking to the cast. They love the characters that they helped create. They're excited to play them again. And so there's been a real energy building, and the frustration is the timelines that in this, particularly in the kind of modern streaming universe, that there's so much time between seasons that just I want more now. And it's like I hate having to wait for my own favorite shows, and I hate having to make our fans wait, to see ours.
That's funny. It's true though. But yeah, I've gotten to talk to a lot of the actors on the show. Kirsty was saying she's excited, and also Kurt Russell is very, so I know you said we appear to have lost Shaw. I don't want to put you on the spot, but Kurt Russell is way in. He's like, I'm back. Bring me back.
Yeah, no, we can't, Kurt is, well, and that was a discovery, we knew, look, Kurt's Kurt, having Kurt in the show is an amazing asset and so much fun. And, he brings so much to the story and to the show, and Wyatt as well, that despite the fact that the way the first season ends, I don't think anyone seriously thought, oh, well, that's the last you'll see of Kurt, so.
Yeah. His enthusiasm is contagious, it seems, and he definitely is.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. Well, it's a great show, Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. You could watch and rewatch all the episodes of season 1 on Apple TV Plus before season 2 comes out eventually. Chris Black, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It was my pleasure. Always happy to talk to you, and always happy to talk about the show.
It's great. Thank you so much.